right now, the markets for electricity are all pretty local. If you have a run of cloudy days in the East Coast, solar doesn't help you, or you might have a run of low wind days. What you need is to be able to average over a bigger area. And if you can average over the size of the United States or of North America by having a transmission network that can move electricity around inexpensively, then you can share not just the energy resources of solar and wind, but where you store the energy. There are some places that can store it with pumped hydro or underground and pressurized caverns plus batteries, and everybody can share. And that was the whole purpose of transmission. If two communities each have a power plant, one of them has to go down for maintenance or something. Well, do they going to have a spare? Well, no. If you have transmission, you can sort of share your facility, share the electricity. And that's what we need to be able to do. China's starting to put in those lines. Europe's putting in those lines. The US isn't doing it.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of Code Green, Conversations for a Future We Want and Our Kids Deserve. To bring this discussion into full view, I want to introduce my guest, Michael MacCracken, a climate scientist extraordinaire, sort of the climate scientist. Why do I say that? Well, he's been at this for about 50 years, 50. He's going to tell you about the first letter he wrote. And I called him to be on today to talk about the most recent letter he wrote to the EPA, begging them, asking them, really just saying, what the WTF are you doing by reversing this endangerment finding on, the health impacts of greenhouse gases and climate change, pollution. It's beyond belief, really, this moment we're in. But I met Michael, if I can call you Michael. You were my first climate scientist back in Nashville, Tennessee. Was January 2007. I believe I was in the sixth grouping of trainees at Al Gore's climate reality training. I don't know what they called it back then, but climate reality now. And our climate reality has only become more stark since then. I don't know how many trainings Gore has done. I don't know how many tens of thousands of people he has trained who are volunteers, giving talks out there, doing whatever they can to educate the public. And you would think, Michael, that we would have come a lot farther along the road. And yet we find ourselves in this moment in August of 2025 at a crossroads. It seems like we've been here before. It seems like we've said it's later than we think. It seems like it's the 11th hour, but it really is. So thank you for being with us. Your CV is just longer than I can read. You have all kinds of credentials. Just say he was chosen by Al Gore to be our climate expert in 2007. And this is now 2025. So he's only gone on to do more great things. So I think I've got the best expert I can find. Thanks for being with us.
Okay. Oh, happy to be here. Yeah.
Lawrence Livermore Lab, the climate group. I mean, I could read all these. It's all climate change, all kinds of great, impressive scientific credentials that you have. But let's just start by taking a breath. Did you ever think we'd be at this point, Michael MacCracken, where we're having to convince people in high office that we are in trouble as it relates to our atmosphere and our planet's health and our human population's health?
Well, I think when I started, it was becoming known it was an issue. There was great hope it would be addressed and they would pay attention. That happened through some administrations, others it didn't. But we thought there would be acceptance of at least the basics. What's been interesting in this filing that I did with respect to the EPA wanted to repeal what the action it was taking with respect to the power sector based on the endangerment finding is that some of the comments in there were not recognizing the science of how the atmosphere works, how the basic greenhouse effect works, which was sort of worked out and clarified in 1896 by a Swedish scientist.
How funny.
And it took a few decades to really clarify some of the issues that were the criticisms. There were some criticisms of what he said about what could happen with what CO2 would do as the concentration went up. But they had been cleared up by the 1960s. And in 1965, the President's Science Advisory Council prepared a report that went to the President and to the Congress and was discussed at the cabinet level, saying that the rising concentration of CO2 was going to affect the climate and they ought to be thinking about it. And it made a projection out to the year 2000 of how much temperature change would probably occur. And they were about right. And so they basically had the physics of the issue correct. And it was confirmed through observations of how the ocean was working, how it took up radionuclides from nuclear tests. It was sort of confirmed by what the temperature of the Earth is and and the heat going out from satellites. So there was good confirmation of that. And here one has a filing from a couple of scientists who really should know better, saying to them, that isn't how it works. We're not going to sort of trust that kind of approach. They just don't explain it. They sort of say, there's already so much CO2, it absorbs all the radiation that it can, and so there won't be much more effect. And that just isn't the case because it matters how high in the atmosphere that absorption occurs or the level of the atmosphere where it radiates to space. And as you get more, you radiate from higher in the atmosphere where it's colder. Whoops. So less less energy is radiated to space. That means you're trapping more heat. That heat goes in the oceans. It's warm in the oceans. The oceans evaporate a lot of moisture. You get this excessive precipitation events that are occurring and flooding. I mean, it's really very basic. And to have this partisanship on the science of it is very strange. You can have a lot of discussions about what you might do about it, but the partisanship on the science is very strange.
Now, when I learned this, pretty simple model, really. I was not a science geek in school, but as I became more interested in climate science, I thought, well, this is interesting. This is real world, right? And as you described, and Al Gore, going on and on for hours for 3, 4 days straight, it was sort of more than I needed to know, but got the picture pretty quickly, right? It's basic. You put a blank, hot car, the sun heats the inside of the car. There's no escaping for the heat. It's basic. These people could Google it. They could use ChatGPT. They could use AI. There's no excuse to be ignorant on the reality of climate science right now. And of all times when we really feel like the planet is on fire. How do you explain this? I mean, it can't just be dismissed as politics, and yet that's what it is. And there's no good politics on a bad planet. There's no good anything on a collapsing climate. Sort of your overall vantage point, having studied this and taught this and tried to raise awareness about this for decades. How do you feel about this moment? Because I'm having a hard time. And I know I'm not alone. We're not alone.
Well, I've sort of kept up in the issue long after sort of official retirement because you want to find a way through to help so we don't pass this problem on to many future generations. And so, I mean, if we really started addressing it early, we would have made transitions, but it's getting harder and harder to find sort of hopeful paths through this. But a number of us just keep working on trying to find ways. One, it used to be that you sort of thought, well, we can reduce emissions and that'll get us out of the problem. That's proving very hard to do. It's proven hard to do in the past when new energy forms come along. When oil replaced coal, you sort of kept the same amount of coal. You didn't get rid of coal. When coal replaced wood, there was still wood being used. For dealing with the CO2 problem, we have to get these other fossil fuel forms down toward zero, essentially. That's something that's going to be hard to do. There's been a lot of benefits to society from fossil fuels, but there's just also a lot of growing harms, and we've got to make that transition. And for some people, it's hard to think about doing that, I guess. That solar and wind are now least expensive way to make electricity is really important. That's a real benefit, and we can take advantage of that. One of the other projects I'm working on is, yes, you have a lot of that, but it isn't necessarily where you need it, and you have to move it from one place to another. And so you really need to upgrade the transmission lines. The transmission lines we have been around for a long time. They were aimed at transmitting lots of electricity, only a few hundred miles. That was all they were really capable of, this high voltage alternating current. But if we could supplement the present transmission grid with a high voltage direct current grid, it's like going from the US highway system to having an interstate highway system for electricity. It can move electricity across the country at the same cost as these transmission lines that we have now can only move it a few hundred miles. And so everybody in the country could have abundant solar and wind from the places in the country where it's abundant. If you go to look at what California is doing, they put in a major power line that connected sort of a remote desert area, Antelope Valley, California, to the main power system. And their few billion-dollar investment in a transmission line has led to something like $60 billion of investment from the private sector to put out solar. And people basically harvest solar radiation. Even if the price is low, only a couple of cents a kilowatt hour, you can make $40,000 per acre per year in terms of income, which is far more than farm income per crops, which is typically in the several $1,000s per acre per year. And so it's a very profitable investment. And so major people are investing in it.
Will that continue under the big, beautiful bill?
It's just a shame that they're not kind of pursuing some of the things that need to be done. There's a lot of people who want to put in, because you can make money at it, put in solar and wind and use the renewable energy, but you have to be able to get it onto a network. And how can you do that? And so there's, a number of us who are sort of in an ad hoc group trying to push an idea that was developed by a fellow from NOAA at the lab, who was listening to all this talk about intermittency. He turns out to have been a meteorologist who had a lot of very fine scale data and about what was happening to the weather. And he was sort of curious, well, okay, one solar panel may be intermittent, okay, when the light's not up. But let's consider the country as a system. Let's consider all the solar across the country. Let's consider wind. Let's consider nuclear. Let's consider all the sources we have. If you can connect them and that was all available across the country, how intermittent would the system be? And it turns out that there's just tremendous benefits that you can get by doing that. So maybe the solar isn't on here, but it might be on somewhere else.
We have three time
It might be
zones.
cloudy, and it can be cloudy in the east, and it's going to be clear in the west. Or you go to the southwest where it's
Daytime here, nighttime, dawn, dusk,
yeah,
all
yeah.
that. So
And so that's so there are approaches we should be taking, and we're not taking enough of them. There are a number of us who are sort of trying to push on that as well. So it's a challenge, but we're going to keep at it.
God bless
What
you.
is
You're
the
very
choice?
calm. You're very calm. You're part of the Healthy Planet Restoration Alliance or Healthy Planet Alliance that is saying we can't just cut emissions, we need to restore.
Yeah, the Healthy Planet Action Coalition is a group that is saying, well, we've been trying emissions cuts for a long time. I mean, if you go back to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change in 1992, it said we've got to take action to avoid dangerous anthropogenic interference with the climate system. That was sort of part of the lead-in to the endangerment finding and everything. And yet emissions have been rising ever since. So you want to do more, even though new technologies are coming in. A lot of people are doing it, and a lot is being done. Most of it is for the new energy demand rather than for really replacing all the fossil fuel use we already have. And so you've got to do more. Well, what more can you do? Well, one thing is you can try and adapt. That was something that You try and help people understand what's happening, and you see if you can adapt. Um, some of these challenges are just too large to adapt. It's kind of hard to do sea level rise, taking land away from you, which was the basis of the Supreme Court decision that led to allowed the endangerment finding or forced the endangerment finding. Um, you can try and pull CO2 back out of the atmosphere, but it's a little silly to be putting it in at 10, well, that's about like 40 billion tons per year, and then try and pull out at a rate of 1 or 2
Tip of the melting iceberg, right?
or something. Yeah, it's not going to work very well. And so so the group of us in the Healthy Planet Action Coalition are of the view that we're already as warm as we really want to be. We'd really like to go back to sort of the more beneficial climate of the 20th century, mid 20th century even. And the only way to do that is to try and push what's called geoengineering or climate intervention. It's trying to say, we just got to reflect away some of this additional solar radiation. And it's not much. You have to reflect away maybe 1% of the incoming solar radiation. So it's not a lot. It would be actually a little bit hard to notice. We've been doing it. Nature does it sometimes when volcanic eruptions occur. The sulfate haze that's been created from the SO2 that comes out from power plants has been doing it. In fact, cleaning that up is actually leading to a little more warming. We know that works. But the idea of trying to intervene in the climate in an additional way is a bit controversial. You know, it's sort of two types of emissions are going to make things right instead of getting rid of the first kind. But getting rid of fossil fuels is very difficult.
And when you talk about,
Really
well,
difficult.
geoengineering, that's not really safe. It's not good. We are geoengineering. Marjorie Taylor Greene is right about one thing. We are controlling the weather. It's not in the way she thinks or they think. No.
The question is, when people ask about that, is they say, oh, well, there are uncertainties with that. Yes, there are uncertainties with geoengineering, but the uncertainties of not doing it are perhaps worse, and the impacts of it are perhaps worse. And we've become convinced as a world community that we have to get off fossil fuels within a few decades. That's how severe the consequences are. That's a big thing, and yet we're not doing it. And so the only way to try and pull it back in a relatively short time or gradually pull it back and sort of you would learn and adjust as you go and improve techniques as you go is climate intervention and trying to do that. As I say, volcanoes do it, volcanic eruptions do it. They're not steady and they're not regular, but if you could sort of imitate them in certain ways, you could help pull the temperature down. Otherwise, all that reducing emissions does, and it's very important to do, is limit the amount of additional warming we're going to get. It doesn't take us back down. This effect is not going to go away when you stop emitting. It's going to stay about where it is because CO2 has a very long atmospheric lifetime, this perturbation to it. And it will stay quite a long time. And in that long
Methane
time,
especially. People don't always realize that methane, is
yeah,
potent.
that's one of the other steps to take, and we certainly recommend that as well, is cutting emissions of short-lived species. There's some species that will disappear quickly, but carbon dioxide will persist, and a few others will persist for extended periods of time. So, I mean, our first recommendation of the thing is, yeah, go after short-lived species. There's a international methane initiative, and yeah, we should do that much more aggressively than we are, and the companies should do it because it's just tossing money out into the atmosphere since methane is natural gas, and so it can be used for energy and stuff, and we'll have to use it for a while for a number of purposes.
How encouraged were you when the Climate Act passed? Inflation Reduction Act, you can call it, whatever it took. It got Republicans to vote for it somehow. And now seeing a lot of that money, a lot of those millions trying to be clawed back by the Trump administration, and a lot of the progress we fought hard for and thought, it's much needed. It's not enough, but it's a good start. It's impressive. It's, historical. And now it's being turned around. how much can they take back? Is it a small percentage? Is a lot of it not been allocated yet, and they're going to take all that back for God knows what reasons?
They're going to take some money back, but what they're doing worse is trying to impede, for example, the spread of wind power or impede permission to build solar fields on land. What the Biden administration put forth in its proposal was to try and get all the existing electric network to be non-CO2. But if we really want to solve the climate problem, you have to get the whole US economy to do that. So all the things that aren't on the network. And so this proposal for high voltage direct current lines is trying to build the transmission network that we need to actually do that. I sort of had said if you've driven around on the US highway system, you can maybe go a few hundred miles in a day as it goes through every little town and village and everything pretty much. Um, but yet what the US economy is based on now is the transport that you can do on the interstate highway system. You can get electricity to go all across the country, and you create a national market for electricity. Right now, the markets for electricity are all pretty local. And so, if you have a run of cloudy days in the East Coast, solar doesn't help you, or you might have a run of low wind days. What you need is to be able to average over a bigger area. And if you can average over the size of the United States or of North America by having a transmission network that can move electricity around inexpensively, then you can share not just the energy resources of solar and wind, but where you store the energy. So there are some places that can store it with pumped hydro or underground and pressurized caverns and everything, plus batteries, and everybody can share. And that was the whole purpose of transmission. If two communities each have a power plant, one of them has to go down for maintenance or something. Well, do they going to have a spare? Well, no. If you have transmission, you can sort of share your facility, share the electricity. And that's what we need to be able to do across the United States as the country shifts to electricity. We've done it for the internet system, connects everybody together. We can, they put the lines along railroad rights of way. That's what this proposal is, to bury these lines, put them along existing rights of way. So it's not going to be new above ground transmission. It's going to be underground transmission. It'll be more secure. It will actually, projections are sort of lower the average cost of electricity across the United States. There are all kinds of business and competitive reasons that we should do it. China's starting to put in those lines. Europe's putting in those lines. The US isn't doing it.
Do you think that the people who voted for Trump, 77 million or so, understand that they were really voting against their own interests, their children, their grandchildren's interests, in voting for a science denier? Which how can that even be? Like, how can you be in denial with we're in the information age? I wake up and I've got 150, climate stories. Now I'm sure Trump doesn't get the same feed, but there's so much information out there, not enough where it needs to be. Solutions programming on a news network, don't get me started. That's been my quest so far, unsuccessful, to educate the public because again, second time, we've got someone in there who's not only not believing we need to act fast and act smart, but rolling us back. And that's one question. Do you think people realize it? And how do we educate the public? And the second is, what do you think is their end game? They're being Trump administration, basically it's one party, Republicans, who are apparently in the pocket of the fossil fuel industry. What is their scorched earth policy going to get us? Those are two big questions, but
Yeah.
I want to
Well,
hear.
I don't think the people who voted for him are voting yes or no specifically on climate change. I think they had
Well,
other
that's the problem.
other interests or something like that. When they sort of wanted to deal with sort of more immediate problems, it's hard to conceive of how sometimes to deal with this longer term problem. The challenge is to get the people in both parties to address this. And there was a time back 20, 30 years, when uh, sort of, John McCain and Hillary Clinton sort of were in agreement on
I remember that.
what to do. And
Tiny
there was
moment in
there,
Camelot.
yeah, there was a time when it was a bipartisan issue to try and deal with it. And that's sort of what we need to have again, that there's multiple reasons for trying to deal with this issue. One of them is CO2 pollution issue, but there's also issue of reliability. How are you going to make sure you have enough energy for the data centers that are being built? So there's a whole host of reasons to do it to strengthen the economy of the United States. I mean, both parties are interested in strengthening the economy of the United States and making it
Right. You would
making
think.
it go better, and I think if one sits down and do it, and it's just too bad that any mention of CO2 means, don't do it. I mean,
But
if
these
you look at what's
disasters are
happening,
billion dollars mega disasters. That's money. It's costing taxpayers. Why is that connection not made?
here's Texas, where they sometimes, you know, aren't talking about it, but they're one of the largest wind producing, states in the country. They have a tremendous wind production area. I mean, the really interesting issue that we've sort of noticed is that the natural resources, wind and solar, are sort of primarily in red states. Okay. They're in red states. Where's the demand? The demand is mainly in the blue states for some of this stuff. So there's a real bipartisan bargain to be made of putting in these renewable energy source systems into some of the red states, and they would basically then, which would create jobs, and they have a product that they would be passing to blue states, and the blue states would be needing it for demand. I mean, it's going to be hard to have enough renewable energy made in New York State to take care of all the cars in New York or New Jersey or any of those states, but they need to do it. And so we all have an interest in dealing with climate change, or should have an interest in it. But there's a real bipartisan economic bargain to be made by those states of doing that. And that's what sort of a few of us are trying to, get the information out about this and understand that, there's a real win-win program, or win-win-win program, or even more when you talk about it, because the network would be more secure and up to date and more reliable and easier to restore after atmospheric extreme weather events. There's a lot of reasons to be doing this.
And there's no good reasons for not. Is it just about helping the fossil fuel interests who helped Trump get reelected? What else could it be?
It does seem that way. That's what they're doing. They need to, those companies also need to move in a new direction. I mean, if they're in the energy supply business, they can be in this market and actually do that and jump past fossil fuels. It's a vested interest. It's sort of, there's inertia, and it's hard to change it, to go to new things. What's, hopeful is the young people are both seeing the climate change, but they're also willing to go to new things all the time, to smartphones and to everything else that is changing. And it's some of the old people think, oh, well, we're going to go back and let's sort of stay where we were. And yet what
Let's
we
go
need
back
to
to
do,
coal. Oh, how nostalgic.
not only nostalgic, it's very expensive compared to solar and wind. I mean,
Every way, in
the
every way.
price of solar and wind and natural gas is going to be 2 or 3 cents a kilowatt hour, or maybe even less as it comes along. The price of coal is 8, 9 cents or 10 cents. I mean, who's going to pay 3 times what it is for what you can have for energy? You're not going to pay that. Business executives, I don't think, are going to go back. The idea you can turn it back to coal is just, I don't think, feasible or realistic.
Not to mention the health costs to public health.
Well, there's that on top of it. Yeah, there's all the health costs that you have of fossil fuels. So it can be the local health costs and the international health costs, and rising sea level and stuff. I mean, they're just these other kinds of things. As I say, the endangerment finding, and I wrote I wrote the brief for the plaintiffs in that case about what the reasoning was. I mean, why should the Supreme Court take that case and deal with the issue? And it was a result of rising sea level. Rising sea level was going to take the land of the state of Massachusetts And when the Commonwealth of Massachusetts joined the Union, it turned that responsibility over to the federal government. And there were other examples. Massachusetts was the lead state, but there were other examples about, what hurricanes could do along the Gulf Coast, what it could do to New Orleans. These are things that are going to happen. The intense precipitation events are going to create these flooding situations where extra warm, moist air runs into a mountain range or a hill range and has to rise. That forces the precipitation out. The air cools, the moisture comes out, and you get flooding rains, and those rains increase. And when you get even more rain, it can't be taken up by the soils. It's all going to run off, and you get these disastrous floods. And it can be in Texas, it can be in India, it can be in Pakistan, it can be in California, it can be wherever. And it creates significant danger for the public.
Do you think that those dots are connected enough, though? Because we're still seeing people who don't evacuate. Look what just happened in Texas. My God, talk about ultimate tragedy. Children in the middle of the night asleep in cabins on a flash flood zone river. We just moved back to California from Texas, hill country, in fact, not far from Kerrville. And they don't talk about climate change in Texas, the politicians and the officials. And could that be a reason why so many people died? Because if you don't have that this is not the usual weather that we've seen in mind, you might not take the precautions that we need to be taking in this era of weather on ultra steroids that is coming in faster and more ferociously and more often.
Given that the Gulf of Mexico's temperatures are warming up, the air that comes ashore is going to carry a lot more moisture. It's also that warm, moist air also, in an unprecedented way, is in some years also reaching as far north as the northern Great Plains, and it dumps a lot of snow. That area is not used to a lot of precipitation and everything. And when that snow melt occurs, they get flooding there. You're going to get more flooding in Texas. You got it in Asheville, North Carolina. The amount, as the temperature goes up, independent of the cause, as the temperature goes up, it's holding more moisture. And it's sort of about 7% more per degree Celsius increase in temperature. But when it runs into a mountain, you get not only that 7% more moisture coming out, but it releases 7% more energy that pushes the air up faster. It warms the air and pushes it up faster, pulls in more moisture, and you get this multiplying effect of just much more moisture. And so you get it, people have planned in the past for, we'll protect ourselves against a once in 100-year storm. That's sort of a number that came up because there were some communities that were having these huge floods every 30 years, and it sort of wiped out each generation's work and everything. And so they said, well, maybe if we go 100 years, we'll take care of some of the risk. But the likelihood of those conditions is increasing now, so that starts happening more and more often. And now you have to build for much more severe events. And that's going to just keep happening. And yeah, you have to try and prepare alarm and warning systems if you can, but it's just very hard to do if almost everything is happening fast and things coming in. It's just very difficult to adapt. There's some things you can adapt to. One of the presentations I've done in the past couple of months is with a colleague from India who was talking about what the situation is in India. There, it's even hotter and more humid than it is here in many cases, almost reaching up to the limits where it's hard to live outdoors. It would be like trying to live in Texas through hot summers without air conditioning. 70% of their people, apparently in at least the region they were talking about, work outdoors in agriculture and in transportation and construction and all these other things. And that's about 70% of the buildings don't have any air conditioning or something. What happens in that? So what would happen if you had the Texas power failure that happened because of snow? But what happens if you happen in the
ice skating on our pool?
Yeah, it's just you can have some really dangerous, risky conditions that exist if our electric system goes down and people don't have access to air conditioning.
Look what's
Um,
happening in Europe. They don't have air conditioning like we spoiled Americans do in every house or office building.
right. When they built up after the war, a lot of things, these kinds of things weren't happening. So it wasn't in their building standard to do that. It hadn't been for centuries. And so yeah, now it gets very hot, and putting it in afterwards is pretty expensive.
Not to
So
mention the expense in carbon of everybody in the world, if they could, running out and getting air conditioners, because of course that contributes to the problem we're talking about.
yeah, it's interesting. My father was in the heating and refrigeration business, and so I learned some things about it. Um,
I wonder
and
you went into climate change.
well, no, and so we put his system, which was to be installed in buildings in the east that had radiator systems, and so you couldn't put vents up the walls, so we had small vents, and he cooled the air a little bit more, and we put it in this house, a neighbor's house, as a test. And the first day it ran and ran and didn't get the house didn't get cool. Second day it ran and ran, the house didn't get cool. We were worrying what happened. Third day it didn't run much and the house was cool. Fourth day, thunderstorms were coming through, and you did what you always did with thunderstorms. You open the window and let the nice cool air back in or something. So then the fifth day comes, it's still hot and humid outside. The air conditioning's running a lot. The house doesn't get cool. Sixth day, the house was cool and it wasn't running much. What was happening? What was happening was it takes about 20 times as much electric energy to pull the dew point down 1 degree, that is, pull the moisture down 1 degree and make it comfortable, as it does to cool dry air. So if you're living in a home in an area where there's a lot of humid air, you want to keep your house closed up and keep as much moisture outside as you can. Well, that's really nice to say, and communities in the part of the country where you experience cold winters are built tight enough so you can do that, and then you can try and keep your bills down. Homes down across the South, many of them are just not built airtight in part, especially for poorer people or something. We're not built airtight, and that moisture can sneak in. And if you try and run you're just going to pay a huge amount for for pulling down and pulling the moisture out of the air. I mean, it's different in California where you live and where I used to live. I mean, there, what you do is you open your windows at night, let the sea breeze in, get your house cool, close it up during the day, and then you open it up.
It's
But
cool and foggy outside my window in Marin County right now in August,
yeah,
you know.
well, yeah, and you have a wonderful kind of style. So you operate a house very differently in California than they do back
We have
east.
solar panels. Yeah, a lot of people do out here. And not too
Yeah.
many in Texas, even though it's hot and sunny almost every day. Don't get me started on that. I want to ask you, you mentioned solar. What about nuclear? Is that a viable near-term solution?
Well, from what I understand, and I'm not an expert on it, its price per kilowatt hour is just quite high. For the plants that have been put in South Carolina or North Carolina in the South, when they came on, the price is 15, 20 cents per kilowatt hour. If you can get electricity at 2 or 3 cents a kilowatt hour from solar, it's not really that viable. It's going to be needed in some countries. If you go to Japan, which doesn't perhaps have a lot of room for solar, you're going to go nuclear. You like to have base load, and it's important to have that. And nuclear can be there all the time, but you can't power the country and have it be nuclear or something like that, just like you couldn't do it and have it be coal and have it be tolerable. And the price would just be far too high. So what creating this national high voltage direct current network would do, it creates a marketplace. And then just as happens with other products, you get competition on price and other benefits. I mean, there can be other benefits in certain cases, but it creates a level playing field for everybody to try and do it.
Should nuclear power plants be part of the solution? They're going to build one in upstate New York. Westinghouse, I guess, just signed on to build 10 nuclear power plants. When you hear that, do you think, okay, this will be part of the mix. We need to move in this direction, or colossal waste of time, money, and are they safe yet from, disastrous accidents? Some say, yeah,
Um,
the newer,
uh,
smaller, cheaper baby nuclear plants are much better. Is that realistic?
Well, that debate's going to go on. I'm not, an expert on it. The people I respect sort of don't think that's going to be the winning strategy in most situations, but there can be different situations where it is. I mean, if you have these huge data centers and they want to make sure they have, sort of 100% reliable electricity or something right next door, that may be what you do. Although those plants have to go down for repairs as well, and so you're going to have to figure out how you bring in power from somewhere else and from some other source. So the problem is we don't have that national look seeming to go on in an organized way. What happened with, the interstate highway system was just like, well, what happened with the national railroad system? Abraham Lincoln, as president, sort of sat down and they worked out getting routes across and making it so there's a national network. Dwight Eisenhower, as president, did that with the interstate highway system, and it proved a valuable thing. That kind of thing sort of needs to be done now for the electric system, and yet there isn't a federal agency that's sort of chartered to make sure that happens. They will look at proposals and decide if that's useful or an increment, but it isn't sort of there providing and saying what an optimal national system would be. And that's kind of unfortunate. And that's one of the things this group is sort of pushing for. It needs Congress to really think about that. You can build, I mean, just like the highway system right now is it gets built by private companies. That's the way the power system gets built. Private companies control the lines, and then there's coordination and things. What you need, though, is the sort of some federal coordination and approvals to try and say, this is what we're going to go. Right now, what utilities are doing is they're responsible for having enough power available to meet peak load over the worst day every few years or something. Least expensive way to do that has been to put in gas turbine plants, even though you might only run them a few hundred hours per year because you don't go to peak all the time and everything. And so the demand right now, there's a several year delay in trying to get natural gas plants there or something. And so that's what they're doing. But a number of the utility people we talked to say if there were assurance there were going to be this national network where energy was available across the country, we wouldn't do that. We'd invest we'd be able to take electricity off this grid and be able to expect it. So if you're in Cleveland and you're having 10 days of cloudy weather or something and the wind isn't blowing, you can't just put in enough batteries to take care of all that without it being very expensive. But, if you could have assurance that, gee, Arizona is going to generally be clear sky, or Nevada's going to be clear sky, or then some desert area is going to be clear sky, and I can get electricity reliable from there, that's probably going to be the least expensive way to do it. If, assuming the state regulatory commissions and the system sort of let you do it.
And what you're talking about is assuming that Congress is science savvy or doesn't pretend it's not. I mean, even if all things were functioning well, and they're not in politics in Washington, in the White House, we still have such an epic uphill challenge with very little time, as you pointed out, because we have kicked the carbon can down the road for decades. In this moment where we have the opposite of what we need, which is let's repeal the endangerment finding, what would you urge people to do? Because we are running out of time, both for this interview and for our planet and our children and grandchildren's future.
This is an issue beyond, this national grid and getting electricity is an issue not just for climate, but for a whole other reasons. The head of the the former head of the Eastern Grid has been pitching this kind of approach as well. They said, look, we need to do this if we're going to be competitive in the world, other countries are doing it. If we're going to have a competitive price of electricity in the world, yeah, we need to do it for our economy, our global position. We need, and it does carbon too. That comes along as sort of a co-benefit even of doing it. There are these other reasons for making this happen as well as carbon. Yeah, there's actions we have to take that are smart economically and worthwhile. And we have to do it for future generations. And then, as I said, with Healthy Planet Action Coalition, we think that we have to be getting on a near-term track to try and intervene and not let the temperature keep going up. I mean, one of the questions to be asked, and our group is thinking about trying to how to figure out to ask it in the right way, is okay, we're sort of zooming past 1.5 degrees. Paris Accord was 2 degrees. What's your plan for, really staying below 2 degrees? I mean, what's your credible plan? I mean, can you get emissions down to essentially zero in the time it's going to take? We have maybe a decade or, decade and a half before that happens. How are you going to do that? But we sort of have to. I mean, the ice, so we're sort of saying, can intervention, can methane controls, can other things try and keep the temperature where we are or try and drift lower? It's not clear that any country in the world wants temperatures warmer than they are right now, that they're benefiting from it. What is your plan? What is the credible plan? It is emissions mitigation. We've been doing that 30 years and it hasn't done enough. So we're going to have to do some additional things. What is your plan? And we think it does involve intervention. And so we're talking about it more and trying to get people to think about it. It is a jump, but it's a jump based on what nature has done to try and limit warming in certain situations. So it's not like it's something completely new. And it sort of holds us in the domain of the climate we're used to representing with climate models and used to experiencing, as opposed to heading up to conditions that are just unprecedented and seem to be catastrophic ahead.
I could go on. I'll have to have you back, Michael, because I have about 5 more burning questions to ask you. But just because this endangerment situation is looming, and you've just written a very strong letter, do you think it will make a difference if the public really screams some rational comments their direction?
Well, the tradition and practice has been that when an agency posts a document or a plan and asks for comments, that they then, before taking action, have to respond to every one of them. I think when the endangerment finding was passed, there were several 100,000 comments that they had to respond to about that. So yeah, it helps to put in not just comments of saying you don't like it, but to try and give some reasons for it. And they would have to come back with reasons. And it turns out the reason they talk about litigation is because those reasons have to be rational and make sense. And so there are environmental groups that will be looking closely to see if they do that, and probably, filing lawsuits and saying you haven't lived up to what you're saying you're doing. You can't make an irrational decision. We're hoping it can get attention to the issues and stuff, but it has to be reasoning. It can be that you're in an area and you're experiencing more extreme weather. And I remember getting a media question about what was happening to rainfall in the Northeast, and the IPCC's report said, oh, it's going to go up in the summertime. And a reporter said, isn't that good for farmers? And I said, well, it really depends, because if it all comes in one rainstorm, it's a disaster for farmers. It has to be evenly spread out over time. And what the trouble is that the observational experience over the last century or more is that a greater and greater fraction is coming in drenching rains instead of the intermittent rains that farmers want. So that affects our food supply. That affects very basic things. It affects public safety and food supply.
Prices, grocery costs. Hello.
Yeah,
all connected.
I think comments are worthwhile, but talk about what it means to you, how it's affecting you and your region in different ways.
How's it affecting me? It's costing my sanity. My gosh, it's crazy, isn't it? Should we all be on the side of humanity having a future? And those of us who are blessed to be grandparents, it's hard to stop. It's hard to quit, Michael.
Here it's affecting a lot of people in the East because the ecosystems are burning. Okay. When you change the climate, what happens is existing ecosystems get stressed, and they're either dry out or they get attacked by pests, and they're going to die, and they're going to eventually burn. And then a new system will try and develop or something like that. But this burning is going to happen. That's because things are shifting. The systems that have existed for centuries and gotten used to fire are now getting stressed.
Mother Nature is trying to
Wildfires,
shake us
big
off like
smoke all
someone,
over the
please.
northeastern US.
We could go on. We'll have you back, but I thank you for every minute. It's been really informative and wonderful to keep learning from you 20 years later. Thank you, Michael
Okay.
MacCracken.
All right.
Good luck. Keep up the good fight. We know too much to quit, right? And we need every
All right.
scientist out there. Thank you for keeping at it, even though you're retired. Wink, wink.
Thank you very much.